Everyone is asking a version of the same question, which is, which skills do I need to learn in order to future-proof myself? It's the same conversation I have with parents about kids, all the way to university students, people in the middle of their careers, leaders that's thinking about their organization. It's which skills do people need to have in order for them to stay relevant and have something to contribute meaningfully. And the zeitgeist seems to be, let's do more things, right? It's, A14Z is going all in on design engineers. And, you used to be a designer, but now you can, with AI's help, write code. Or it's, you're an engineer, now you got to go into go-to-market as well. Not just create the product, but actually deliver to the customers, closing the feedback loop, tightening it so that the product can be better. Or it's, you're a product manager, you used to be in the middle of all these other functions, but now you can also prototype. Now you can also get into the strategy even more, and now you can do more. Let's do more in order for you to stay valuable. I think this is missing the point. Not that it's not good to be a design engineer or, for a product manager to be empowered to do more things. But rather, it's confusing us to think that, okay, value comes from me doing more work, right? And if we really look at what we're doing, if we take a step back, every single job that we do is value creation, right? If the cost of hiring you to do this job creates more value than it costs, then it's a positive thing. It contributes to the growth of whether it's the company, whether it's the society, whether it's, the economy. So we need to look at value creation and what are the skills that create value. So it doesn't matter if you're an engineer or you're a salesperson or if you're a product manager. If you know how to create value, naturally you are able to, doesn't matter how the environment changes and shifts, you'll be able to leverage the technology to help you create value. You'll be able to adapt because you know the core skills, the meta skills of creating value. And luckily, value creation is very well studied, and we have really great frameworks that already exist. So let's talk about the 4 skills of value creation so that you don't feel like you have to learn the whole world, boil the whole ocean in order to feel like you can stay relevant. So let's get into the frameworks. The 4 meta skills we're going to work on actually come from this framework, 4Ds of management. This is Mike Michalowicz framework, initially designed for business owners and to solve the bottlenecks in their business. And as you can imagine, whenever there's a bottleneck, if you solve the problem, you create value. And these value creation levels really match to the value creation of any organizations, big and small. So first, let's talk about the framework, and then let's talk about how you can use this to practice your meta skill. First of all, the 4Ds. What are the 4Ds? It goes from doing to deciding to delegating to designing. And originally in the business owner's context or leadership inside a company, is first, there's lots of things that people need to do, right? So you tell people, hey, do these things. But what you realize is that you are still, or whoever has the knowledge, is still deciding for people who are doing the doing. Let's say, they're asking, hey, do I use red or blue? Hey, do I use this font or that font? Do I go in this step or that step? And so until the person who has the skill can decide for everyone, they become the bottleneck. Okay, so you don't want one person to hold all of the knowledge, which is why then you move to the next part, which is delegating. In delegating, you create all of these standards, these best practices, these frameworks, so that other people can apply the judgment that you already have. So now, everyone is applying these judgments, but the end product always come back to you. Hey, I've got this output. It looks really good, but what are we going to do with it? Don't know, right? You decide for us. You bring it all together and realize the vision, which is why the last step is designing a system so that everything has its place and everything feeds into one another. This way, the operation runs without having one single bottleneck that needs to orchestrate everything. So if we think about these 4 stages, the output of doing are, tasks that are finished. The deciding becomes judgment that can be applied. The delegating becomes outcomes that you can outsource to others to create. And the designing creates a system that is able to deliver on those outcomes, share the judgment so that the tasks get done. Now, the problem is for most knowledge work, even if you're in a managerial role, most of our time inside an organization is spent on tasks. What I mean by that is, even though you have the name of a manager, there is usually a lot of deciding that you still have to do for your team, right? There is, in most corporations, not a culture of creating frameworks that can be repeatedly used. People are just going case by case. As we're doing something, let's review it, let's decide together, let's make sure that we know what we're doing. So already, even though we spent 10 years building up towards that middle management position, 5 to 10 years, it still haven't taught us how to move along this levels of management and the meta skill of not just deciding for other people, but also truly delegating the outcomes to others and even designing a system for the team to use. So already, first we want to analyze, in your current role, in your past experience, which levels are you comfortable doing? Let's take salespeople. This was a HBR research done on salespeople. The most stellar sales representatives, when they're promoted, they actually don't do a good job of their leadership role because those two require completely different skills, right? Previously, you're just selling. If you can sell, that's great. But can you articulate the judgment to new salespeople who are joining the team? Maybe, right? Maybe there is some training involved. Maybe the frameworks are already being shared. That's great. How do you help them integrate them, right? Or is you delegate outcomes. Can you actually delegate the outcomes to say, hey, hit your numbers. Let's say, hit $100,000 by this end of this quarter. But do you give them all of the constraints, all of the support, all of the structure, all of the frameworks so that your new sales team members can hit those outcomes? Most people don't have a system for doing that, right? And most of our time is spent on doing what we're good at because that's where we got very good validation for, hey, you're doing a really good job, you got promoted. So you think, okay, I got to do more of the same thing. But in reality, we're changing the skills that we're using when we move up into more of a management role. So we want to first answer for ourselves, which skills do I need to work on in the 40s? And here we don't take it for granted that if I change my title, automatically I'm supposed to have the next skill ready. Rather, it's an intentional build of these skills. The second one is then, how do we build this, which is to explicitly extract your expertise and judgment. I've talked about this concept in detail in this video as well, where a lot of people feel like, oh my God, the second that I start to make explicit my judgment, maybe other people will just take it and use them and then it'll be gone and I will have no value. The reality is counterintuitive, right? Every single writer, every single thinker, they got to their place because they externalized what was inside their brain. It's not just that they thought they were smart and they become the bottleneck of all the work that they're doing. Rather, it's externalizing that knowledge, that expertise, that judgment, so that other people can apply it and creates more space for them to take it to the next level. And this is specifically if you are using AI together with your work, which all of us at one point is going to do, if not doing already, then you can only get good quality output from AI if you tell it good criteria, good judgment, good expertise, things that you've learned that it didn't have the opportunity of doing just reading the average of the internet. So being able to do this is crucial in moving up the 4 meta skills of value creation. And let's go one skill at a time so we can break down the skills that we want to practice. First, for doing. The question we're asking is, what can I see now that I couldn't before? And this is bringing reflection to the work, because when we're actually doing the work, that's where we're building the judgment, we're building the experience, we're building taste, we're building craft. And all of this is improved by knowing, hey, previously I couldn't see these things that affected the output, but now I can see it. So what are they? Being able to articulate that is important. Then for deciding, here is all about the criteria and trade-offs. Because naturally, when we're doing, we have constraints, right? Finish this project by end of week. Hey, make sure that this meets certain quality bars and answer certain questions. And so as we're doing all of the doing, when we're focusing more on deciding, hey, so which path should we do? Which choice should we make? It's about what's the criteria I'm using and what are the trade-offs I'm making and which one do I prioritize when? Being able to articulate these means that you're extracting your judgment and you're starting to build your framework and your mental model of how this task works. Because now, when you're actually delegating to others with the outcome rather than, hey, here are the specific steps that you must do in order to get there, what you're trying to get them to know is, what do they need to know? What does someone else need to know in order to make decisions to get to the outcome, right? This is to get to an outcome rather than the specific task. And here you want to be explicitly not just giving them the judgment, but also see, what kind of context do they actually need in order to make sound judgments? What kind of escalation path do they need when they feel like they don't have enough information and need that from someone else? Who are those people that are going to be able to supply those? And what are the examples of both good and bad, so that not only do they understand abstractly the frameworks that are involved, but they also see real examples so that they can then judge their work based on multiple ways of thinking about the problem. Because finally, in designing, we're focusing on the system, right? So not just, hey, do these tasks, hey, be able to achieve this outcome, but have a bigger picture of, okay, so your outcome from this task here, how does it connect to the next thing? What is even the next thing? Do people know this? What kind of people then get brought together at which stage? And how does feedback work so that we are continuously improving, capturing the right data so that we're moving the system towards a virtuous cycle and be able to get to the bigger goal that is in place. So as you're seeing, we are starting to build out the mental model of the work, right? First, it might be just small tasks here and there. Then we add the criteria and the trade-offs. And maybe it's when these things happen, prioritize here. And when these things happens, prioritize here. So we start to see some of the context. Then in the no, we start to build out examples. We start to build out context. And we start to connect to the task and make it more 3D, more detailed. Because then eventually in the system, it says, okay, all of this fits into the bigger picture. And the big picture, we get feedback. These are how the things connect to each other. And all of this leads to our North Star, our goal, our mission, our vision of what the world looks like, right? And as we're going here, we are moving up to the big picture. And here might be the detail. And the important thing here is not just to go this one way, not just to move this way, but also be able to move back and forth. I cannot emphasize this enough, right? Whenever people think about, do I start to focus on just really the strategic stuff now that I am a manager, now that I'm a leader, I feel like, the small stuff probably shouldn't sweat it because, people say I micromanage and look at the details too much. Of course, if we just spend most of our managerial time on small details, it is a waste of time. But at the same time, doing the actual work is helping us build judgment. So there is importance in doing the work, right? But it is then what's missing is how do you then make sure you create the criteria and the trade-offs for not only yourself to think through, but also for others to think through. How do you make sure that you take the work that is in the detail and elevate it to context that other people might need, to examples that people can use in order to build their own judgment and be able to get to an outcome without you outlining, hey, step 1, you do this, step 2, you do this, step 3, you do this, right? And get everyone to be able to see, even at their level of detail, what is the big picture, right? What is our North Star? And then also help them, keeping those things in mind, how do they go back to their work and make sure that that is being implemented? That whole loop, being able to do the whole loop is the meta skill, right? It just so happens that in most organizations, because the designing is done by someone else who is all the way at the top, that you don't have a chance to practice the designing or practice true delegation where you can give out an outcome and get people to get there, right? That usually happens at the executive level where there is enough power, enough influence, enough room to wiggle in order to get, teams below to start to delegate. But actually, even within one team, you can start to not just be the one that's doing, not just the one that's deciding, but also start to practice the craft of delegating. And how do you practice all of this, right? Because you could be, a university student who doesn't have anyone to delegate to. You could be, even if you're a middle manager, everyone's so busy. How do you make sure that you can delegate outcomes when everything else is forcing you to do something different? And that's where I think using AI agents is the best way to go through all 4 of these stages in a loop. Because what happens is, if we look at this, right, first, you just have a bunch of stuff that you're doing every single day, too many things to do. So if you get your AI agent to just do the simple things, like, read through my emails, or hey, draft me some stuff, you are getting it to do the doing, right? But at that moment, the bottleneck is still you, because you have to decide, hey, the tone is not right, or hey, you got to use company standards, or where are they? You're the one who's deciding how to make the edits, which is why it feels like a lot of work. That's the perfect moment to start to distill some of your frameworks, your criteria, your judgment, how you think about what good work looks like. Distill that into frameworks, into documents that your AI agent can use so that you can delegate the outcome of, hey, I need to have a executive update for our executive team by this date. These are all of the context that matters. These are all the good examples of what a good update looks like. These are all the judgment criterias. These are all of the things that you need to consider in order to do this. Once you get your AI agent to be able to do that, then you can think about the system of, okay, let's say, the output I always have to do every single month is an executive update. So what is that workflow that gets me there, right? First, there probably needs to be some sort of update on the project. So where are we? What do we need to do? That's one part of the workflow. Once we have that, then it goes into the next step of, once we have it, I need to be able to take transcript from our executive meetings to understand what are the things that they care about. Okay, bring that in, and then apply our updates to figure out what are the things I want to tell them about. Okay, once I have that, then how do I structure my update so that it is easy for them to read and for them to see the importance of my updates, right? Maybe it's, hey, I want to use pyramid principle. Hey, I want to use some of Vicky's executive communication frameworks. Whatever it is, you start to see that, okay, now I can design my system, my work system, so that it works towards that North Star. Right? It could be that, hey, I want to be the VP of my department, right? So in order to get there, I need these executive updates to be good. I need to have a good handle of all of the projects that's going on and what are the updates and be able to translate them for the executive team. If that's the case, that's what you work towards, right? If you're an entrepreneur, then is what is my North Star? Maybe it is I want my company to be sold, or I want to get my first Series B for my startup. So in order to do that, what are the different parts of my business, of my workflow that connects so that I can build a system which makes the outcome inevitable because they have all the judgments and they contain the tasks that are being done. In the end, why we're afraid is because of our identity. Most of us attach our worth, our identity to the things that we're doing, right? That's why a lot of people have difficulty letting go of the work because they were praised for being such a good executor on these things. And so when they go up the ladder or go up the management chain, it is hard to let go because you feel like, but that's my craft. That's what I'm good at. Instead of that, we want to shift our understanding ourselves and the identity that we bring to it. It is not just I am good at doing X, Y, Z. It is I am good at creating value, right? And this 4 stages of creating value means that you're not just stuck with one way of doing things, right? Most people feel like if I am doing something well, then that is my value. But if AI can now do the job that I do, well, now I have no skills. That is not true. Value creation happens at all 4 of these stages, right? So if all of the doing is being replaced by AI, that is a good thing. You can actually do higher level thinking. You can think about what are the judgments that I have that I can produce so that I get the AI to do a better job at executing those tasks, right? How do I design the entire flow to get to a good outcome so that we can stay flexible, keep all of the new technology being able to be applied, and at the same get to an outcome? What are the criteria? What's the judgment? What are all of the context examples needed to get there? And of course, move even further up to say, can I design a system so that we can not only get to an outcome, but know where does it fit in next? What comes next so that we can do more things? We can learn from the feedback, tighten the feedback loop so that we get to our North Star. We want to shift our identity away from just I am worth something when I do something to I am worth something when I create value. And value is not created with just doing. So all of that to say, what are the skills that matter in order to make us future-proof is to know that we can create value along this loop, not just from doing, but also from deciding, from delegating, and from designing. Give this a try. Check out this next video here if you want to get more into AI agentic workflows so that you can practice. And I have a resource down below as well to start your AI agentic journey. I'll see you there. See you in the next video.